What is karma and why is it important for spiritual life to understand karma?
So this karma is a very vast topic. Uh, I'll attempt to just briefly touch on the most important points. Karma is the law of cause and effect while embodied. So all embodied beings, whether they are sentient or insentient beings, have accumulated karmas, the law of cause and effect, that then must be suffered. So there are two types of karmas, prarabdha karmas and aprarabdha karmas. The prarabdha karmas are the karmas that have already begun to bear fruit and must be suffered. This is everyone, including self-realized, liberated beings. So examples would be Jesus the Christ, who suffered his prarabdha karmas ultimately by being uh, murdered, hung on the cross. Mansur Mastana, a great Sufi Siddha, uh, suffered his prarabdha karmas. He was beheaded. He screamed out, "I am the truth," just before they chopped his head off. Sri Ramakrishna had developed cancer in middle age. And even our own Bhagavan Nityananda, who developed rheumatoid arthritis, which he had for all of the years that he was embodied. And in his later years, his fingers began to stiffen and curl up. So these are examples of prarabdha karmas. They've begun to bear fruit from a previous lifetime, and therefore they cannot be destroyed. They have to be suffered. We say suffered. I'll explain why I keep saying suffered in a moment. And then there are the aprarabdha karmas. So aprarabdha karmas are those karmas that have not yet bloomed. They have not yet begun to bear fruit. And these are the karmas that can be destroyed and are destroyed by a Siddha Guru who gives Shaktipat, for example, and by the practices that are instructed by such a being, daily spiritual practices, wisdom understandings that are to be embraced, etc., that allow one over time not just to have the aprarabdha karmas burned, but also to be taught how not to create any new karmas, because that's the big deal. That's why sadhana is performed. So those are the two types of karmas. Every desire or craving that is held in the mind with great intention must be fulfilled. This is the utterance of Lord Shiva. And so karma is important to understand because activity occurs in the mind. The body has no agency. And so the actions performed by the body are not where to focus with respect to karmas. Karma is thought, it's thinking. And this is how karmas are developed. The karmas are embedded in the subtle body, of which memory is a part. So for example, if you have an interaction with someone and then the interaction is over and you continue to ruminate over that person and you continue to ruminate over the interaction, that creates an impression that is left behind on the mind and deposited into memory. And it is later superimposed back into consciousness. I spoke about this when I talked about superimposition. And so what happens is from lifetime to lifetime, as we go along, we have a great storehouse of these impressions known as the world of our inner impressions. And those impressions give rise to the limitation of the ego. And when the mind and the ego get together, the restless mind combines with the ego idea, there is the desire to possess outcomes and to possess people, places, and things on some level to some degree. So this kind of impure thinking is what creates karmas. Your karmas dictate your mental conditioning. And so this is why it is so important in spiritual life to understand the law of karma, at least on a basic level, because all karmas dictate mental conditioning. And the mental conditioning is brought forward from past life. So from lifetime to lifetime, the mental conditioning is brought forward. And so we can see this in people who have really bad habits, who have struggled for years to break their habits, and they're unable to do so. It's just one example. There are lots of people who complain about habits that they're unable to break after many, many years. Some of these people are in therapy and are still unable to break their habits. This is karma that has created the mental conditioning that causes the habits to manifest and to grow. So this is karma. In true spiritual life, it is absolutely necessary to receive Shaktipat to fully address karmas, particularly the aprarabdha karmas. But you also have to be able to suffer your prarabdha karmas with a smile on your face without becoming agitated, frightened, or traumatized. So why do I use this word suffer? Because all karmas are suffering. Karmas lead to birth and death and birth and death over and over again in a multitude of forms. All karmas. Whether you consider the karmas to be good or bad, there really is no such thing as good or bad karma. There is just karma. Karma is what causes you to be embodied. It's what causes you to be stuck in the vortex of birth and death, this cycle of birth and death over and over again. Some people say, well, that's not too bad. Maybe, in my next life, I'll come back, I'll have more money, I'll be a king or a rich person, or I'll have my choice of husband or wife in a better circumstance. But you don't know that. You can come back as a dog. You might come back as an ant that people step on. You might come back as a frog. You might come back as a fly. So the guarantee of karma is that you're going to be reborn in a form over and over and over again. It's like, I like to compare it to the movie Groundhog Day. Now, I don't know if you saw that movie with Bill Murray, but this is a movie where the essential story is that a guy who's a weather reporter for a particular network is very jaded. He's very jaded, very sarcastic, and he decides to go to a particular town to cover Puxatani Phil, right? Whether the groundhog actually saw his shadow, to tell people whether we're going to have spring early or whether we're going to have a longer winter. And he has these experiences in this town in a loop, and he's in this loop over and over and over again and can't get out of the loop. He's stuck in this town, stuck in this loop, running into the same people every day, experiencing the same circumstances every day, and waking up at the same time, and he's just stuck in this loop. So I like to refer to that movie because it's a good example in a visual format of what karmas are. You're stuck in this loop, the cycle of birth and death, over and over again, lifetime after lifetime. And there's no guarantee that you're going to have a physical form in your next life. Now, the reason why that understanding is important is because it is only in a physical form that you can realize God. It is only in a physical form that you can attain permanent spiritual transformation and the state of liberation, if that's what you want. That can only be had in a physical form. You can only make the journey home in a physical form. My Gurudev, based on this fact, used to say, don't waste any more time. Do it now. Make the journey home while you have this blessing of being in a physical form. The physical form is the only form in which you can actually know God on a direct and personal level. So these are some of the reasons why understanding karmas are so important. Then what is necessary is the spiritual leadership, the instruction and command of a Siddha Guru to lead you in daily spiritual practices and to lead you in embracing the understandings that will allow you to stop, to arrest the thinking that creates more and more karmas. So that you can purify your thinking, so that you can rein in the restless mind, make the mind silent, cause the mind to dissolve when you don't have any necessity for performing any task whatsoever, so that you can rest in the self, so that you can rest in the indescribable joy of the self as much as possible from moment to moment throughout your day. And then over time, with the right leadership of a Siddha Guru, the limitation of the ego is destroyed. This is a necessity for you to stop creating more new karmas. That egoism must be destroyed outright. That takes time, but it's entirely possible with the right practices and with the right leadership. So here in Nityananda Shaktipat Yoga, we emphasize the importance of reining in the restless mind. We emphasize the importance of witnessing awareness, spiritual witnessing awareness, the state of witness consciousness, so that you begin to observe all of the places you allow your mind to roam that are no longer useful for your spiritual growth and that actually undermine you with respect to the thinking that creates more karmas. So you need this state of witness consciousness, spiritual practices, and the leadership that will allow the eventual destruction of the ego, combined with the grace and the blessing of a Siddha Guru that begins with Shaktipat, so that the Sushumna Nadi, the subtle body, can be purified of all of the impressions that are stored there. These are karmic impressions. They are gradually destroyed by the grace and blessing of a Siddha Guru and also by your grace, which is required with respect to your self-effort in following the instruction, the practices, and the methods that you are given. So that bond of power over time destroys all of the latent impressions that are stuck in the subtle body, in the Sushumna Nadi. And this is how the aprarabdha karmas that have not yet begun to bear fruit are completely destroyed. This frees you from the prison of cause and effect. This allows you to exist in a state of inaction or non-activity in the midst of activity. That you're never tainted by any action you engage in, starting with thinking, and then also by your deeds. So this is karma, and this is why it's so important to understand karma with respect to spiritual life, spiritual growth, permanent spiritual transformation. So we do from time to time spend a good deal of time examining karma in mini courses and in our weekend Shaktipat blessing retreats. Do you have any more questions about karma.
Thank you. Yes. How do I know that I have karmas, and how do I know what my karmas are?
You know you have karmas because you're in a body. That, that's the first way you know. You've been reborn. You're in a body. This body is a limitation. Hmm? There are only certain things that you can do, attain, etc. You're in a body, you're stuck in a form, you're in this earthly existence. There are only so many things you can do or accomplish with respect to your body, is what I'm saying. And so that's first and foremost how you know. The other way you know, and people have these experiences even without having a guru, is that there are times where I'm sure you've experienced, for example, they call it deja vu, where you're in a particular location or you're having a particular interaction, and it feels like you've had the interaction before or you've been in the place before, even though it's never happened in this lifetime. That experience of deja vu, as they call it, is the experience of karmas. Hmm? Then there are dreams. Many people have dreams where they don't understand why they're having the dreams. The dream doesn't make sense with respect to their daily existence. Often in dreams, you're experiencing scenes from past karmas. This can happen with friends, it can happen with lovers, husband, wife, girlfriend, or boyfriend, intimate kinds of relationships where there is this reflection in the dream state about a relationship that you had with this person in previous lives. This also happens with people who have pets, who have an incredible bond with their pets, cat or dog or bird, and don't understand necessarily why they have such a strong feeling about a strong feeling or connection to their pets. This is also due to karma. There are situations that I'm sure you've been in, that everyone has been in, where you have an interaction where there's, just to use this as one example, there is a falling out and there's a huge amount of energy behind the fallout. Maybe it's an argument of some kind, and there's a huge amount of energy behind it, and it's an amount of energy that doesn't make sense, right? There's so much energy behind this interaction, and it doesn't make sense with respect to uh, the interaction itself, what's being exchanged, and also it doesn't make sense with respect to the level of relating you're engaged in with this person, right? So I remember when I was in grade school, just to use this as an example, and there was a girl who I did not know very well, but we were head to head all the time. Even a simple conversation turned into an argument. When we fought, people would say they're fighting like husband and wife. They would make that joke, like they're fighting like an old couple, right? And so reflecting on that years later with an interaction with a person who I really did not know, this was past karmas. So these are just some examples that I think most people can relate to. Any other questions regarding karma?
Thank you. Are karmas ever useful?
Yes, they are useful if you are able to face your karmas with a smile on your face while also digging down into the root cause of the karma. Then the karma can be useful in advancing you in your spiritual attainment. So I'll give you an example from the early stages of my sadhana. I was involved in an intimate relationship where there were a lot of karmas between myself and this person. And I wound up paying all of her bills, taking care of her, and I was paying her bills even before I was paying my own bills. And this led to me not being able to pay my bills. we were engaged in all kinds of intimacy, and this would happen at the drop of a hat. And the karma was such that I was unable to resist anything that she wanted me, almost anything that she wanted me to say or to do. What happened is, and this was on the command of my guru, first I began to look at my interaction with this person with regards to how I had been raised by my mother. So I realized from this karma that my mother, who had trained me over many years to care for her. So I grew up in the performing arts. I was a professional actor by the age of 7. By the age of 10, I was earning an average of $2,000 to $3,000 a week acting. I never saw any of that money because I was underage, so the checks went to my mother. And she spent most of that money on things that she wanted to do. She would travel to the Bahamas, she would go to Europe, she would go here and there. Very little of that money was spent on me. And then there was a period where my mother, who was an actor and singer and dancer, she was raised in the operatic community. She was a great opera singer. And then there came a time where she couldn't get work as an opera singer or an actor. So she refused to get a job. She felt that that was beneath her. And so when she couldn't support herself, she expected me to support her, which I did. And I was doing that for years. I grew up with this. Even in high school, I was supporting her. And so I had been trained to do this. And that was reflected in my relationships with women, that I would immediately step into the role of caretaker, even when it was not appropriate to do so. I would step into the role of caretaker. I would allow myself to be directed in that regard, even when I was not properly caring for myself, as I mentioned in this one relationship. And this carried over into many other relationships. So when I looked at this particular relationship, I realized I had this karma, and it was a karma that proceeded from my karma with my mother. And so by the grace and blessing of my guru and by Baba's leadership, I began to create boundaries. This was something that I was not good at. I was not good at creating boundaries, and you really have to know how to create boundaries. Boundaries are necessary to command respect and to command a love in situations, particularly where you're being taken advantage of, which I was. I had been taken advantage of by my mother. I was taken advantage of seriously by this girlfriend I'm speaking about. And so I began to look at the necessity for me to establish boundaries. So this karma helped me to do that. I established boundaries with my mother. I told her I was no longer going to pay all of the bills, that if she wasn't going to get a job, then she had to move to a lower income housing where she had less bills, that I was not going to pay her bills. So I told her, you're going to have to face the reality that if you're not going to get work singing or acting, you have to support yourself. You're still a young woman. She was in her 50s. You're still a young woman. I'm not going to support you. I have to support myself. I've got to figure that out because you're not supporting me and you've never supported me. I was supporting myself since I was 6 years old. My father divorced my mother at a very early age. I was self-reliant at the age of 6, and that never ended. I paid my own way through school. I paid my own way through college and university and music conservatory. Nobody paid anything. I worked. I earned a living to pay for everything I wanted. I had no parents who were caring for me financially. And so I gave my mother this ultimatum, and that was it. And I never went back on what I told her. And then, with respect to this girlfriend, I said, look, this relationship is over. It was based on me fulfilling all of your needs, without me getting very much in return. It was based on you manipulating me into caring for you in every way, which is not a good foundation for a relationship. So I said to her, I will always be your friend, but we're no longer going to relate intimately. And you have to start caring for yourself. She had a particular illness, and so that's what she complained about. But I said, look, how many people on the planet are sick? And they still go to work. You can't use that as an excuse. Millions of people have one illness or another, or even serious illnesses, or they're disabled, but they work. I had friends who were disabled. I had friends who were in wheelchairs who were working a steady job, 40, 50 hours a week. So I said, you can't complain that because you're having a battle or a bout with illness that you can't work. Of course you can work. She was a very intelligent woman. She was just lazy. So I said, I'm not going to support you financially. We can be friends. You can call on me for moral support. You can call on me for any support except financial support. And other than that, we're done as far as any other type of relating. So that karma opened my eyes to some bad habits, some leanings and tendencies that I had to address, which I did by the grace and blessing and leadership of my guru. And it changed everything. It changed all of the future relating that I was engaged in. That's just an example I can give you. So this is the way in which karmas can be very, very beneficial for spiritual life and for permanent spiritual transformation. But you have to understand the message of the karma. And I can share, at least in my own experience, that without my guru, I would have never understood that karma in that way. And I would have repeated the habits, the bad habits with respect to relating, I would have repeated those over and over again. It was a very new thing after that for me to relate on the basis of friendship as a foundation without either person being dependent on the other in any way. That was new. That was a blessing of my guru. Did I answer your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Namah Shivaya.